Russia and America. They go through periods of relative peace and periods of conflict.
This is the way we can strike the hardest blows against Russian communism.
Russia, with its focus on collectivism, tradition, and secrecy, and America, with its focus on individualism, expression, and progress. Today, we will explore American versus Russian culture. So let's analyse. How can you tell your Vlads from your Chads? Well, we're going to start with the space race. The space race was arguably one of the most important cultural battles between Russia and America because it represented more than just going to the moon to see if it was made of cheese. This was a battle of technological superiority, ideological supremacy, and basically, who was the cooler bruh?
This is Houston, over.
There have been times when I have thought to myself, gee, I wish I had never gone on that flight.
Buzz Aldrin. Buzz Aldrin was the second man on the moon. We're not going to talk about Neil Armstrong because he's kind of boring, I'll be honest. Buzz Aldrin, when you would see him in interviews, was always very expressive and he had a very confident personality.
How disappointed were you that you were the second man on the moon and not the first?
I like to be associated with the fact that I was on the first lunar landing mission instead of being the second man to walk on the moon.
He would often talk about his feelings and what it felt like. Was he scared?
I did feel very much on stage, 240,000 miles away.
And on top of this, he had the very classic American pioneering spirit, going out, adventuring, conquering the world. He was pretty much a classic American man. But then, over in Russia, you had Yuri Hahari.
The Russian Tu-104 touched down on London Airport. Among its passengers, one of the world's most famous men, Yuri Gagarin.
Yuri was the first man in space. His personality was very different to Buzz. He was calm, poised, and very modest. Despite his extraordinary achievement, he never really played himself up.
I mustn't be a monopolist. Other people must also get the chance to make flights into space.
He was basically downplaying his own individualist achievement and highlighting that this was an accomplishment of the Soviet people.
Muscovites can look aloof, standoffish, some even say unfriendly. Russians aren't known to smile a lot. In public, most of them put on a poker face. So why is that?
Russians can often be caricatured as very stern, very unemotional, very calm, modest.
Because winter lasts so long and there's no sunshine.
If they're not smiling, they're in a bad mood. That probably means that most Russians are in a bad mood.
It has to do with the uncertainty in this country. That's why people here always look so unfriendly.
And within Russian society, it's often seen that people who are too charismatic were kind of viewed as being a bit self-centered and overly individualistic. Whereas in America, it's the opposite.
Oscar winner George Clooney, sexiest man alive, 1997.
Basically, I'm here to announce that we're building Iron Man. This has been a secret project we've been working on for a long time.
Man, I'm pretty. Americans love drama. They love personal accounts. How did it feel when you did the thing? Were you scared? Were you nervous? The founding principles of America were based on free speech and free thought, meaning that one of the most important things is your opinion and your thought.
How do you know what's good for me? That's my opinion!
So it's really interesting when we look at these different attitudes towards charisma, expression, and kind of wondering why are they so different. There is a few very key things you can point to as to why Russians are so unexpressive. One of those things is the cold. Russia is cold as fuck. It can get to like -50 in the winters. All you got's a bottle of vodka, a bowl of shy, and a kiss from your babushka.
This sucks. I hate it here.
Shut up. Drink wolf milk and watch Russian cartoons.
You kind of just have to accept your situation is shit and be a bit stoic about it, not complain and not be too expressive, crying and saying how hard life is. On top of that, Russia has gone through many changes of leaders. From the Mongols to Napoleon and the USSR, they've had brutal dictators and kings, etc., that have treated the people terribly.
In the early 1930s, millions of Ukraine's people died in a devastating famine. The existence of the famine was denied by the Soviet Union. Historians in Russia and the West disagree as to whether the famine was man-made and if it was a deliberate attempt to eradicate Ukrainian independence.
And so this leads us to the core difference between Americans and Russians. And these can be understood as collectivism versus individualism, and their respected political movements, communism and capitalism. Just really quickly, I've noticed whilst working on this video how evident bias, partisanship, and sensationalism is when I've been researching. And so to combat this problem, I've teamed up with Ground News, which is an app and a website that gives readers a transparent and data-driven way to read the news. What Ground News does is it will take stories and show you how different parts of the media are reporting on it. So for instance, very relevant to this video, if we talk about this story from Ukraine, Slovakia announces to end military aid to Ukraine. We go down further, it will show you the general factuality of the outlets reporting. It will also show you ownership. So we can see over here there's 68 total news sources. 8 are on the left, 10 are on the right, and 9 are in the center. So this has a biased distribution of 37% towards the right. And we can look at all the different headlines, and whilst the left and the right are quite similar on this topic, the content of the story itself can differ. So by using the comparison feature, you can see that the left is tending to focus on Slovakia's previous aid to Ukraine, while the right calls for a change in EU policy. There's also a section called Blind Spot that will show you stories that you might not be seeing from the news outlets that you follow. So to get unlimited access to important features, subscribe to Ground News' Vantage plan. You can get 30% off by using my link, which you can find in the description. By doing so, you support my channel, and also you will get a full picture on stories around the world. Anyway, back to the video. Russia has a long history of being ruled by Tsars. Basically, most people were called serfs, which were just average plebs. They would work in the horrible cold weather for long hours for literally no money. They were the property of the owner of the land. They were bought and sold along with the land in a system called feudalism. In this life, you don't matter. The only thing that did matter was your community. In order to survive in these harsh conditions, they would have to work closely as communities for everyone to survive. Whereas in America, there was a very different story happening. America at the time was basically the Wild West. No, in fact, it was the Wild West.
This town ain't big enough for the two of us.
In America at the time, you were really free to do anything. And you might not be successful, but you could attempt to go and make anything you want. And one of those things was money. There was a book by Adam Smith called The Wealth of Nations. This is a very important book that helped spark the ideology of capitalism. This was the idea that the freer the market was, then the freer the people were.
If you're not making money hand over fist, something's terribly wrong.
And so the individualist attitude spread through America. But in Russia, it wasn't that. Instead, it was life is hard. We must work together as a community to survive. Ultimately, me on my own, I don't matter at all. And like America, they too had their own book, Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. Russians bought into communism pretty heavy, I would say. They created the USSR. They encouraged other nations to join and just give us your sovereignty and we'll make the communist utopia where everyone's equal and there's no more classes.
Just kidding.
But of course, communism was a shit show. Loads of people got killed. People were being spied on constantly. Family members were turning in their other family members for being dissidents. Artists, poets, if you just were a bit too out there, a bit too flashy, you would be killed. And so, ironically, there grew this very strange culture where they had a collectivist mentality that we're all on the same team, but we're very suspicious and we spy on each other and we don't trust anyone. But you see, we've talked about how opposite these nations are, but they both do have one thing that is completely in common, and that is...
We must fight to regain our freedom, or everything is lost. Everything is fine. Everything is fine.
They are obsessed with proving that they are better than the other one. You got the space race, the arms race, the Cold War, the Olympics, proxy wars. These two nations invested heavily in these things that were pretty much just to show how cool they were. And this war became a very prominent and core part of both nations' culture. The USSR banned listening to American music, rock and roll, jazz, pop, disco. You couldn't wear blue jeans because that meant you were a capitalist pig. Branded clothing, no chance, mate, because those were dirty capitalist symbols. There was heavy uniformity in attitude, in dress. The hairstyles that are popular in America, like long hair and mullets for men, the USSR police would force you to cut them. And this was all definitely more state-imposed than perhaps on an individual level, because it was often very alluring to try and get your hands on those sweet, sweet Western items. The same could be said in America, where there was heavy anti-communist propaganda.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it.
If you saw your son sharing his sweets with little Billy, then you'd shout at him for being a communist and lock him in his room. Anytime you'd see a Russian in a Hollywood film, it was always a bad guy. There was like this purge of communists, which was basically akin to like cancel culture now, where anyone in like any job, mainly creative, Hollywood, etc., these people would basically be blackballed out of their career because their neighbor's sister once said that they liked the idea of a minimum wage.
You're just a capitalist dupe. All you care about is money.
But look, this is all like big picture historical stuff. Let's just chill out for a little bit and look at how their lifestyles compare. So let's compare the Ivanovs to the Smiths. The Ivanovs probably live in a multi-generational family. They will have their babushkas, their dedushkas, all living under the same roof. They probably live a slower, more rural life. Probably work on a farm or maybe in a factory. They're probably very traditional. The Smiths live in more of a nuclear family. The idea that there's 2 parents and 2.5 kids. They live a far more fast, work-orientated life. Convenience is the key. They have a love for technology. You can control the temperature of your Gatorade with a voice command in your phone. The oldest son, Steve, is working at a tech startup. Dad and mum own a family business. But when work's over and it comes to dinner time, the Ivanovs will settle down with a massive family meal. Inviting all the family round. Because we're all a collective, we're all together. The food is served communally. You can kind of help yourself, pick which bits you want. The food tends to have stemmed from years of not having meat, so it's quite a lot of vegetarian stuff and foods that can be preserved a long time. Dumplings, cabbage soups, pickled vegetables, breads, and of course they'll be drinking tea. However, at the Smiths' house, it's very different. Food is very individualized. Everyone has their own personal portion, put on a personal plate. No, Becky, that's the blue plate. That's my plate. You know it's my plate because it's blue. Becky's a communist. They'll be eating things like hamburgers and chicken and pizza and things that you can individually hold in your hands. There's also a wide range of ethnic foods because America's so diverse, lots of different cuisines, tacos, pasta, sushi. They, of course, love fast food, and they're probably not drinking tea. They're definitely drinking coffee, you know, the capitalist fuel. But then, of course, we got to look at leisure. Can't always be working and eating food. Sometimes you just need to have fun. The Ivanovs are probably at the local theatre or ballet. They're very sophisticated because they like fine traditional art. Maybe the family are gardening together, or maybe they're saunaing together. Father Boris is out with his bottle of vodka, ice fishing for the evening meal, and young 8-year-old Ivan is, of course, playing chess. When it comes to the Smiths, Dad too does love a bit of gardening. He's always out keeping the front lawn clean, taking a long time because he's always talking to his lovely neighbors. Oh, hey Susie, how's the kids? Mind how you go? The family might come together to go to school sporting events. Maybe movie nights where they eat popcorn lathered in butter, endless sweets, fizzy drinks. Mother Jane and daughter Becky are filming TikToks together, and young 8-year-old Jack might be playing Little League Baseball. And so look, I'm of course making vast generalizations. There are definitely lots of Americans who live very rural, very traditional lives. And there's definitely Russians who live in modern cities and are very tech savvy and money driven. But it is interesting finally just to think about how these two mentalities have spread across the world. If we take the Eastern Bloc, which is between Russia and Europe, we can really see this as a tug of war between very Western American ideals.
Russia invaded Ukraine. Democracy paves the way for the rule of law and to the key principle of our countries. Every person matters.
And very Russian Eastern ideals.
Belarus is not what you might think. The basic principle was this. Lukashenko promised political favors to the Kremlin and to Russian businesses, and in return he received gas and oil at sub-market prices.
A lot of the nations have embraced more Western attitudes towards capitalism and have been seeing lots of growth and lots of success after the USSR fell. And Russia doesn't always love that. The anti-Western sentiment in Russia definitely did decrease a little bit after the USSR. They even tried out democracy for about 5 minutes.
Russia is a democratic federation.
And then obviously they got in a new dictator, Putin, who's been in power for over 20 odd years and changed the laws twice so that he can serve for even longer, meaning he will currently serve until 2036.
I'm not fucking leaving!
So nowadays when we look at Russia and America on a sort of political level, Russia are still very drawn to strongman leaders, whereas Americans are very much drawn to charismatic leaders.
Do you want to go back to them or do you want to stay with Donald Trump?
Trump.
Russia has very heavy moderation, they have no free speech. They very much embraced a uniformity of opinion and just a trust in the Russian state and the Russian leaders. America very much still believes in free speech to the point that it has led to a very deep divisiveness. So it's really interesting to think how culture might evolve in 10 years, with these developing nations rising and being more tied with Russia, but also America always being the cultural powerhouse and having tons of influence. So I guess we'll see if hamburger sales or vodka sales go up. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and make sure you check out the Afters podcast where we go into this topic and many others by checking the link in the description. Peace.